Thank you to everyone for joining, and we're very excited to have Justin Rackliffe from Fidelity Investments presenting today. I've had the pleasure of hearing Justin speak last year at the Linux Foundation Open Source Leadership Summit, and with his many years of experience inside a highly regulated industry, which we all know are not it's not always in their nature to collaborate. He's certainly been working on open source within Fidelity and across the industry for some time, and we'll have some very interesting and helpful insights to share with us today. So with that, we'll do I'll take note of attendees. Oh, the other me has been kicked out apparently. And we'll go ahead and get started. So I will hand over to you, Jason. Justin. Oh my goodness, did I just call you Jason multiple times?
Don't worry. You would not be the first. You won't be the last. And I had to get over that a long time ago.
Excellent.
I signed all my emails with a J. It's close enough for work. Hopefully everybody can see the screen, and it's not coming into the presenter mode. It should be just the slides.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Fantastic. So I won't spend a whole lot of time here because Dasha just did a great job. So over the last couple of years, I've been responsible for the OSPO, kind of taking it from what many of us had to deal with, kind of a board, unaccountable parties that kind of tried to guide our open source practices, and shifted it over to, in some ways, a formal OSPO following Linux Foundation, yada, yada, yada. Don't read too much into the slide stuff. It has actually helped with trademark dealings. Whenever I use our corporate presentation materials, I always get the trademark folks on me. So just use the Linux Foundation, they'll be fine. And over the last couple of years, we've really been trying to get us on board there. Try to formalize the program. You can guess timing. So again, the OSPO was founded late 2017. Who knows what happened in early 2017? But that was what happened. So been really working there and trying to do some cool stuff. I've done a lot of stuff in the past. I worked with the OpenStack Foundation and generally trying to do infrastructure type of cool stuff, and now cloud type cool stuff, and open source type of cool stuff. So onto the meat. So this was a deck I had given at the Open Fintech Forum, Linux Foundation event in New York back in December, I guess. And it really just comes down to, it's always the lessons learned, best practices. We all know we can share best practices. Goal was, let's call it 20% of 20 minutes of exposition, half an hour or whatever we have left for actual conversation. I find that's usually actually more helpful. And think of this as kind of, let's call it day two. You've already decided that open source is important. Your management decided that open source is important. And you've now said, okay, now I got an OSPO. What comes next? And oftentimes that's complicated because what you're dealing with is corporate culture. You're dealing with a legacy or a way of thinking, and it can become really, really complex for that day two, and honestly frustrating and a little disheartening at times to break through some of that level of thinking. But one key thing, and the reason I start off with this kind of quote, is that these myths and these things that we're battling against as we try to change corporate culture are there for a reason. Oftentimes, these practices are not, they weren't put in place to prevent us from doing things. They were put in place to try to protect the brand, protect the firm, protect all the associates who are trying to do their jobs. And they may have to change. They have to be tweaked. but we have to do that with a healthy amount of respect for why they were there. Too often I've seen and talked with teams that people just don't get it, or they're dealing with backward thinking or anti-patterns, whatever the case may be, whatever they want to brand it from a corporate context. But then I'll ask them, okay, did you have a conversation on why that's there? It's like, no, they're just wrong. And that doesn't get you very far. Honestly, you're going to lose a lot of credibility inside your organization if you try to just say, well, the world has changed, you need to catch up, and it's going to lead to a level of rejection on everything that you're trying to do. So this session is really just about what I call myths. And they're ways of thinking, they're things that have come up, they're things that I've dealt with over the last couple of years, and try to distill them essentially into kind of, again, buckets, but generally just trying to make people aware. Go, oh, okay, yeah, I heard about that, or I feel that, and hopefully help for everybody. I like to lead off with the myths from your OSPO, essentially yourself. And the first one is kind of the if you build it, they will come mentality. That's actually a picture of Field of Dreams. I did not try to pursue actually getting Kevin Costner to sign off on using his likeness. But some of we have this feeling like once we create this new program, and we put out a web page on the corporate system, maybe send out a couple of emails, all of a sudden the army of associates is going to start showing up and trying to do great things. Sorry to disappoint you, it's probably not going to work out that way. The OSPO really has to get in front of there because, again, you're dealing with a systematic level of thinking. People who have been working in one model and often using open source, maybe even contributing, but often consuming open source. They wouldn't think of doing anything else. They're not busting out proprietary front-end frameworks anymore. But they think of it in a very much a passive mode, and that's not bad. But one of our roles in trying to build an open community and a better engagement externally, and honestly why we're all here and FINOS Foundation exists, is to kind of break ourselves out of this shell. So we really have to lean in on what are our goals here, and it's going to be marketing. I know every geek loves marketing, just like I love public speaking, but you need to be able to wrestle with that and figure out how do people, from your corporate culture, what are the systems of record that they go to? Because some may live purely on email. So you getting a Twitter handle and starting to put stuff out there, let's just say your e-communications policy is very liberal, that may not work. It may not stick for your associates. It's just not the way that things are done. So you really have to listen. What are ways that people find that they can hear about new things, but also not get buried in noise? We all get way too much email as it is. So again, very much a listening thing. Advocacy. So when we look at, when I've kind of dealt with what my role is, a lot of it comes down to developers want to do things, but there's somebody else who is skeptical. And it can be your responsibility to lean in with technical details and subject matter expertise on why you actually can do stuff. And sometimes the developer is their own biggest critic. I found some that are like, we'll say, hey, you should follow the governance for the project, but if there is no governance, just use the copyright header in your source code files or your patches or whatever you're doing. And they're like, well, I don't know if the upstream project is going to allow for that because we have to give them the copyright. I'm like, no, you don't. And I have to educate that developer. So they'll assume just off the fact that they can't do contributions because of a copyright notice. And you'll get a little bit of an opportunity to educate them around what is copyright? Why does that matter? What do you have to do? What just happens? And it may make them feel more comfortable in actually dealing with their management or their security office or their auditor, whomever that they have to deal with. You can help be that bridge, help them feel more comfortable in an ecosystem which is very risk averse. We've had a very tough day or a tough week in the markets, and people are not necessarily looking to voluntarily do something that's risky. And so you have to be able to build that comfort. Being coming up alongside them, being their advocate can be the thing that allows them to go and have those conversations. References. So oftentimes people just don't believe it happens. So being able to point out and build those kind of relationships within your firm about, hey, what things worked well, what things didn't, and connecting, let's call them prospects, because in some ways you have a little business going here, prospects with those who have been successful, and those who are your partners who may have helped you improve your process or taken off rough edges. And in that, your networks. You're going to know so many people across your firms because we're all siloed. We all work in different teams. We all think that we're in some ways unique. Sorry, we're not. You can be that bridge builder. Help people come together. Give them places to have a conversation, grab a coffee, that they may not have dealt with because of their line of business. Our retirement side versus our retail brokerage side. Sometimes I have to kind of pull them together in a room because they just don't normally cross paths. So now we'll get into, again, and that's that self-criticism. You always got to look for that plank in your own eye before you're checking for specks in others. One myth, and then probably the most common one, is going to be from your associates. So again, you'll find this, especially if you're new, you can't do it. It's going to take forever. That's a giant door in DC. Essentially, you have this belief within the organization that doing open source is purely just kind of consuming passively. There's no way to open a patch. There's no way to correct a bug. You can't even open an issue because it might be e-communications, which is heavily regulated, and we just can't do that. What you want to be able to do is get away from that fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And again, a lot of times in heavily regulated firms, that's going to come through artifacts. So what's your corporate policy? If you don't have one, don't blame your associates for complaining or being skeptical or being concerned. You have to put something in place. It has to be well written. You have to talk to your legal folks and say, okay, I really want to make this durable. People need to know that what they're doing is good. And if they have questions, take it as feedback. If they have concerns, look for ways that you can, I won't say amend policy, but add metadata around that policy, scenarios, that kind of stuff. I know one that's come up with me a couple times has been something that I ruthlessly have privateered from Jeff McCaffrey now at GitHub, but he called the moonlighting policy Microsoft at the time. Can I do open source off company hours? Well, it kind of gets sticky. There's a little bit of gray area there. And it really comes into motivation. But I went and I talked to my ethics team and said, okay, we don't, if people are volunteering in some community, we don't want to know about that. We don't spend a whole lot of time. If they're working on computers and teaching somebody, not for pay, but purely in a volunteer kind of mode, we don't need to have that kind of heavy awareness. So why is writing software any different? And we try to kind of build out scenarios where it's clearly not, quote unquote, fidelity related, or it is clearly fidelity related, and then also stuff in the middle where you could kind of get into a gray area, and you don't want to create an appearance of issues. So who to have conversations with if that occurs. And really just help the developers feel comfortable with what they're doing and why it isn't a threat to their career. In fact, it may be a leg up. Education, again, that same vein, taking all of that experience and that subject matter expertise and putting it in formats that are appropriate for your organization. And it hopefully allows for some level of certification, pass-fail on some level, and really focuses the developer on those shared responsibilities. Because again, like any large organization, you can't scale. You can't have an army of analysts trying to police GitHub. It just doesn't work. So what you need is to promote awareness throughout all the developers that what are the coarse grains? How does licensing work? What is security? What's our tooling? What's our development lifecycle tooling? All of that kind of stuff. How this all helps to do open source well and promotes an external surface. But maybe leave away some of the finer grain. You don't need to go into deep copyleft history or archaeology, but you need to be able to kind of indicate to people what things matter, how to measure it, what are best practices, what does attribution look like. Give people some really general handles, and they will do the right thing. And they will help you. And if they see something that's wrong, they'll probably let you know because you've been their advocate. You've talked to them and said, hey, I want to help you out in doing this because you think you're excited about it, I'm excited about it, the firm should be excited about it. And again, generally helping them be, in some ways, your eyes and your next level of advocates, your ambassadors in each one of those organizations, that you're not the corporate bureaucracy trying to stop people from doing cool things. And again, process. It needs to be clear. People need to be able to look at something and go, yep, I know how to do this. I know what my gates are. I know who I need to talk to if that's necessary. Hopefully reducing that kind of manual processing as much as possible. But generally, giving people a clear set of instructions on what to do and being open for them to say, hey, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Because tools change, processes change, ways to fix problems change. GitOps didn't really exist a couple of years ago, but now it is, and all of a sudden you have configuration defining infrastructure in pull requests used for change tickets. Oh, okay, well that's different. What does that mean? And how do we make sure that that's reflected in all of our processes? Give people a level of confidence that what they're doing is safe and appropriate. Everybody's favorite, security, woo! Again, a tongue-in-cheek on making references to early 2017, but these things are real. No one wants to show up on the front page because of this type of work, or because of security issues. We're already having enough time with transactional load. We don't need to stack on there. So how can you work with your security folks and your inside legal teams to be that partner? And again, a lot of it is taking your expertise and your knowledge and helping describe some of the problems that working and doing open source well in a sustainable way helps to resolve. So what's the risk in a fork? Because you'll hear people, they'll just say, well, can we just get that code, take it away from GitHub, and then just work on it? And yeah, you could, but is that the right answer? And being able to describe to them what that means long term. Sure, it works day one, but what does day 20 look like, or day 50? And being able to describe them in real security level terms and compliance and licensing terms, what that means long term. And again, when we look at the viability of projects, the more of our firms that don't invest in these common platforms and these tools with our development hours, really trying to do the hygiene stuff, not just consuming it, and maybe not even just paying for a commercial distribution, but really investing our talent there. It takes away from that community. The project is not going to move forward because big users are coming at it through some sort of lens. And we want to be able to promote diversity within those projects because that is what allows them to evolve, to better meet everyone's needs. And no one wants to bet their business on a project that's potentially going to sunset. If it gets stuck, that's a risk. And we need to be able to provide some context to it, provide evidence to it. And at least in my experience, that's made a lot of sense to the security folks. They see that, they recognize that, that when projects go abandoned or they go stale because there's not a good, vibrant community around it, they're going to have to find an alternative. That's expensive and it's risky, so they get that. And then you always have somebody pull out intellectual property, keys to the kingdom, crown jewels, type of stuff. I always have to be the bearer of bad news. Most of the open source is not going to pass a novel test. It's not unique. You are not special. And I get to pop that bubble on a regular basis. And again, it's not something that's a negative. It really just says you don't have to be concerned with it. I know who I need to talk to from our intellectual property attorneys, whether it's programs or patents programs, trademark folks, where it matters or where we might have potentially something that could be patentable. But generally, I got to help people understand that that's just not, it's not something you're going to deal with on a regular basis. And you shouldn't necessarily allow it to be the specter that hangs over your developers, because again, it's gonna prevent them from doing cool things or thinking about doing cool things.
Justin, just out of interest, just jumping in at that point, because this is an interesting point. So just because, as you said, that someone might not have an issue, even when they do, that doesn't stop you open sourcing. So just to confirm and make sure you agree, you can patent an idea and still open source it and drive it via the open source market. But that does give you more options if you have the patent in place.
Yeah, and what I like to make sure is, so if for some reason it seems super unique and super cool, something that may, in a post-Alice world, be able to be patentable, if that was the case, just like I would tell somebody to go talk to the ethics folks, I'd introduce them to our IP folks. And we go through the discussion and get it on the record that we don't want to pursue patents around this. Because what you don't want to do is somebody does something cool, it takes off like wildfire, and then you have somebody from your internal IP team go, did we get a patent on this? This isn't comfortable for everybody. So it's a level of due diligence. But again, it's probably going to be most likely a rounding error on the number of conversations that you're going to have. Most people are going to be working on things that are well understood.
The one you're obviously going to be aware of, so Quorum for us is our Ethereum version that we've now, so that's reputational, we're possibly going to spin it off. There's all sorts of financial opportunities, but what's interesting for us is it doesn't stop you open sourcing it though. It's still a really, really good method to go open source, drive that requirement, get other people involved. But interesting enough, you work in conjunction with your IP team, not them trying to protect everything.
Yeah, 100% agree. Again, those conversations, the communication is an essential. It's kind of let's call it a foundational principle across all of these topics. Talk to people. Don't make assumptions, because the assumptions will come back. And it doesn't mean you can't deal with them. It just becomes awkward. And that's going to be a disincentivizer for others to follow suit, because they heard that somebody they got the 12th degree because they didn't go and check with IP first. Be that broker, help to kind of link some of that stuff for your teams. And again, look for those opportunities, but also be the advocate to say, you know, if we're going to open source this thing, there are great patent holding groups that allow folks to be able to do cool things and build on innovation. Let's not try to take those innovations, put them behind the wall, and then just give people implementation. Because again, it may be reputational. It becomes awkward. And again, that's not the future of open source. That's not why we're all here, is to figure out how to necessarily drive heavy amounts of revenue through licensing, or create a little bit of friction there. That's not helpful, probably for our core businesses. Again, it's something that is a concern and you need to be able to respect, because it is part of corporate culture. But it's something that you want to be able to be that bridge, to talk to people about all the different motivations and hopefully getting some better results. But yeah, great point. Patent's always a fun one, especially with, let's say, more mature firms, when it comes down to open source, and you have folks who are like, we won't do patents. That's not good, but that also creates problems. And versus we're going to do patents, and we're going to do them in a way that doesn't protect them in a manner that prevents collaboration or prevents engagement. So one of the last myths, again, this was, let's call it a 20-minute deck. Management. This is always a fun one. We all love ERPs. And people will make a budget, they'll make a giant feature budget, they'll bring on associates, they'll be focused on actually getting stuff done, and then somebody says, hey, I want to make a patch to some open source project, and they go, well, that's going to be at a cost for me. I'm not going to get a feature, or I'm not going to get something out of you. And you need to be able to step in there and help understand that it's not just about, talk about security, but there's also the costs. The maintenance of those downstream forks, or the maintenance of the workarounds for a bug that you know is there, but you're unwilling to invest upstream. It collects. That technical debt will cost you. And sometimes the management team is unaware of that because they're so used to getting something from some third party that, well, they'll fix it for us. And again, maybe that's true. You don't drive their timeline in most cases, and it becomes complicated. There's a lot more efficient ways of, especially for even commercial distribution type projects. We've done some patches for things that we pay for because it allowed us to get value from that feature quicker. And yeah, we went and we talked with that commercial team and said, hey, we got this pull request that's really super valuable for us, but we want to see in the commercial distribution, how do we make that go faster? And the partner was super willing to have those conversations. And we all benefit. The product is better, there are better users, it was more secure, a whole lot of good stuff. So those conversations become super helpful, and they become something that you can then reference to other teams as they approach these challenges. I don't play to the talent one really, really hard. It is something that I think we all have to be aware of. I wouldn't over-rotate it, especially when you start looking at things like, well, GitHub's your resume kind of thing. It can create diversity and inclusion concerns, accessibility concerns. It can be career challenges for those who can't publish all of their internal work. So what you want to be able to do is to really talk to the ability for people to engage not only in source code, but also externally, talking, attending events, participating in events, all of that kind of stuff needs to be part of those conversations, because it's those visible things that are going to get developers there. Keynotes are great, but it's that talk that really catches the developer and they go, that was awesome. I want to know more about that. How can I be a part of that? And if they can be a part of that publicly through some open source work, that's great. And they can go to your repo du jour, your external position, visit GitHub, GitLab, fill in the blank, doesn't matter. And they can see what things you're investing in. They're going to be more willing to, when that opportunity shows up, to throw their resume at you. And you can have those better conversations. So the type of talent you're going to get is going to be the talent that's the most invested in the project that you're excited about. Because they can be visible. They're not just potentially looking for a paycheck, which we all are, that kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but they can now see what's really cool there. And then switching costs, again, these things, they catch up with you, and they'll catch up with you fast. It doesn't take too much pressure from the National Vulnerability Database or some sort of community level challenge to create a huge amount of disruption up the supply chain. So what you need to be able to do is to promote a level of flexibility and optionality. People have to make decisions. They got to choose projects. But understanding those motivations and being invested in those projects actually allows them to reduce the switching costs, because they know why they chose something. They know what features they're using. They may have patched features. They know how it needs to work to get the job done. That type of knowledge is incredibly valuable because it allows you, if something is disrupted, for you to be able to switch off and find an alternative in a much lower or tighter timeline than if it was just in a black box that you were essentially consuming. So there's some super value there. And then the last myth. So this is kind of an underlying one, is that open source is an outcome. It's something you do. It's a result. It's a product. It's not a strategy. And again, it's a myth that I find is very prevalent, and it really it's an overall problem with teams, because when they approach the project, they treat it like a commodity, and they just want to derive as much value from it as they can without actually thinking about its viability and then move on. And that just doesn't work. So when you start thinking about open source and open collaboration as a strategy, how you're going to approach the next big problem that you have, it really does change the entire narrative on how you do business, because it's the willingness to work in consortia, to find foundations, to invest in common answers that allow you to still have your distinctive competencies. I don't think it's some magic, everything's now going to be vanilla. Everyone still has a platform strategy. But we don't need so much friction between the platforms that it's so expensive, and it makes getting that talent so much more of a challenge, because we have to build it up again and again and again and again. Everybody does something just different enough. We can find these better answers. Again, we're all frenemies here. We're all competing against each other. We're fighting for the same talent. We're fighting for the same market position. But that shouldn't necessarily come at the expense of finding some better answers to allow us as the firms to find what are we the best at? What is really undifferentiated? That's the stuff we can handle as a consortia. And then we can build upon it to reflect our unique value. What do people look to our brands to get done? And it's not some advanced container security system for Kubernetes. I know no one calls up Fidelity and says, hey, I've been thinking about opening a brokerage account. Tell me about your container security strategy. That's not their first thing. It is really important, but it's not the thing that's going to drive business. And we need to be able to say, okay, cool, if that's going to drive business, fantastic. Doesn't mean it's not important. We have to invest in it, but let's try to find those common answers to make it less expensive for all of us, build consistency, and that, again, generally raise all ships so that we can better meet that new account opener or whomever is coming to us for cool stuff. And that's it. I gotta add the open fintech slide at the end, but ignore that one. So that was it. Folks find that helpful?
Yeah, it was great. Thank you. There must be some questions. If not, I'll jump in with some. But does anyone on the line have questions for Justin?
I'll dive in here. This is Rich from Freddie Mac. Any suggestions on a GitHub policy? One thing that we struggle with is how accessible to make it. Security wants to block the whole thing, and in fact has done that. Developers want to get access to everything. Do you have a strategy on how you manage that, or any suggestions?
Oh man, you can't whitelist the internet. That's always my line. That's always my line for when security says, "Hey, I want to block GitHub," or how do we know what people are using? And then I show them a node modules list, and they go, "Oh, that's bad." So it goes back to that kind of process. So what I would say is make sure, again, really lean on policy. What's the process you can do? Try to find those trade-offs. Again, in some ways, find the most interested parties. Get them in a room together, have a subset, a slice of your developers, talk to why they want to do things, have the security folks talk about what things they're concerned about, and then see, hey, can we come up with some common answers that's basic, a 101. You can't eliminate risk. It's just not, I don't think it's a healthy goal. But there's ways that the teams, if they talk together, can one, recognize what the other people's motivations are. It's not about just locking everything down, but also build up, what are those shared responsibilities? What are the things the developers have to do to promote the needs of the firm and potentially the audit or compliance or security folks, and then reflect that back in the tool. Some tools do it better than others. GitHub's hard because you're trying to balance an intranet and internet, and there's no NAT gateway. But I think there's a lot of stuff when it comes down to just basic features about how you change visibility on a repo and being able to talk to that control to your security team and say, hey, I as the organization owner, the only one who can make this change. This is how people request it. This is how we fulfill it. This is where the audit log is. And this is what happens when it's done. And the security folks won't be really happy that we have a public repo with source code in it. Ooh, scary. But you can do it. And the developer won't be super happy about it because they just want to be able to go in and just change the setting to public or just never done private. So again, it's finding that the level of middle ground, and that's the OSPO's role. That's that kind of broker of subject matter expertise for risk, compliance, developer experience, the whole 9 yards, to hopefully bring people back to a common answer. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you very much.
What does the governance look like at Fidelity? And how do you avoid the accidental communication of information that should be maintained as a proprietary piece of information?
Um, so, I mean, I try to have lightweight governance. Essentially, I like blacklists. I don't like whitelists. So people know what a rejected license is, and they have tools that will look at what they're doing and tell them early on, hey, you're trying to use something that it doesn't align with policy. Find something else. And they may still call me up and say, hey, I'm getting this, I need help. But really trying to be very narrow with policy and governance. Because you try to poke holes, essentially, to allow certain things through, all of a sudden you have a screen door and a submarine, and you have the worst of both sides of the equation. It becomes really important to focus on what is material risk and what's the cost of doing business, put it in contextual terms, get some sign-off from appropriate parties, and say, hey, I can't eliminate risk here. Here's my risk reduction. See if they buy it, have the conversations. If they say, hey, go back, I need refinement in this area, at least you're working from something, some specific thing. I need tighter controls around the audit logging. I can do that. I can't say, hey, how do we make sure that no one can do anything? That is bad. Can't do that. So really being precise, and again, they're going to come at you with the boil the ocean problems. How do I make sure that someone doesn't take some source code and put it into GitHub, into a private GitHub repo? Well, even if you were to blacklist the domain on your proxy, it doesn't stop them. Creative people will work around that, and there's a bunch of creative ways to do that. So I have a different presentation I've done a couple times around desired paths. If people know what desired paths are, it's kind of like when you're looking at a sidewalk and you see, let's say if it comes at a right angle, and you'll see that kind of dirt trail between two areas. And when it comes down to developers, they're looking for path of least resistance. But if it doesn't cost them too much, they're going to walk on the sidewalk. They don't want muddy shoes. And you want to be able to look at that kind of desired path, see where they're showing up, and then look to see, okay, can I guide that? One, should I have a sidewalk there? Or two, can I make using the sidewalk less costly for them? And again, it's a little nuanced there, but you want to look at the results, have those conversations with the developers, and again, be very, very clear that you can't prevent it outside of doing like trenches where no one can go outside it. And at what cost? No one's going to want to work at a firm that feels like you're just walking down a trench and you can't actually see all the things that are going on 80 million repos. You can't shelter that because again, from an innovation perspective and a community perspective, you're going to die, and nobody wants that. So that's again part of the OSPO role is to be able to communicate some of that to the business, saying, hey, yeah, you need to accept some risk here. Not saying it's not without risk, but this is the reward. This is what our goals are. This is how we can measure it. This is how we can secure it. This is our control portfolio. This is our audit logging. And when something happens, because something will happen, you need to be able to respond to it and say, yep, I missed that. I'm going to do better. This is how I'm going to do better. And really just kind of own it and not potentially point fingers at somebody else. And hopefully it's a minor thing, hopefully. But again, it's really that accountability on behalf of the firm and saying, hey, I'm gonna stand with the developers because I believe they're gonna do the right thing. they want to do the right thing. How can I help them do the right thing, and how can I, within reason, help them avoid doing the wrong things?
From the perspective of a moderator of an open source project at a financial institution, what guidance, or is there guidance for helping moderators draw the line between openness and control?
Let's see. So, talking best practices. Hey, look, what am I doing right here? So, if you're going to be maintaining stuff externally, one, have a code of conduct. Set some ground rules in how people can respond if they see something that's problematic, because your brand is on the line there. So you have kind of a two-level thing where first you got set some ground rules on what community management looks like for your organization. Use somebody else's code of conduct. Don't create your own, or at least minor riffs on it. I think there's a lot of good examples out there. But own that. That's kind of the boilerplate that invites people in. And then as maintainers, doing some form of education, what's appropriate communication, what's talking implementation versus patterns, being involved. So especially those early days with let's say a new maintainer, be watching the issues. How are they responding? Are they responding in a way that could be a little gray? And then have a sidebar and say, hey, I saw you trying to help out somebody who opened an issue on the repo, or was doing a pull request. And I think we need to work on that. And be specific. Again, be the advocate there. Say, hey, if this continues, one, reflecting badly on the firm, that's bad. But also, it has a threat to, we're going to have to close this repo down, archive it, whatever the case may be, because we don't have the appropriate maintainership. And that also comes down to the abandonment side. One thing, I mean, I'm a big advocate for working upstream for our associates, more than writing a new thing and putting it on our public org. We still do that, but I really challenge teams to look and invest in existing projects rather than creating new ones. And I really just come down to cost. Doing community management, responding to issues as a team, as a Fidelity team, it comes with a pretty significant cost and a lot of complexity. And I think there's oftentimes we're not unique in the marketplace. So somebody else can do that. And again, you can still potentially be a maintainer on that project, on that external project, but you're part of many. You're one of many. And that really allows for a better scalability. Does that answer it?
Thank you. Thank you.
I know it's a little fuzzy, the joys of what things I can talk about, what things I can't. But when it comes down to best practices, again, being clear and concise, I think really helps people. Do folks see this as do folks see this as a problem? I'm going to ask the audience. Poll the audience. Do you see myths within your organization?
Yes, definitely.
Good. Woo-hoo. At least no one's looking at it going, no. Everybody understands everything. And again, it's all there for a reason, and it's all modern and good.
Justin, in a big organization, what are some of the ways I've come across sometimes the you have an open source policy, or a large organization has an open source policy, and maybe it's not perfect, maybe it's on its second iteration and not yet its third, and maybe all of the workflows aren't fully around it, but there is a policy. How do you make sure that people know that, given that, as you mentioned, organizations are often siloed and can have, thousands of developers or software engineers?
Marketing. So almost that
And
first one.
is it internal marketing? Is it, making sure that you're in internal newsletters on the intranet site, going to team meetings? What are some of the things that you think have worked best?
They've all worked poorly. Again, because there's always the subcultures. You have some folks who are like, they just love everything all the way down to, did you put it on the teletype? So you want to be able to have those conversations. So one of the most valuable things that I've found when it comes down to communication has been being in those team meetings, being a stand-up, and talking about it. Usually it's because somebody said, hey, wouldn't this be cool to open source it, or we got to fix something on an upstream project. And then being the best partner with that person, because they will be your scalability. So when somebody else in another team says, hey, I have this upstream, oh, we talked to Justin, maybe he can help you out. And you get those kind of invites. Policy is important. Giving people a place to go is really helpful. Our intranets are large, and I don't care if you're running a Google appliance. Indexes don't buy you very much because people usually won't go look for them unless they have a problem. We do have mandatory education, so, and I'm sure everybody does for different topics. So this is a topic that I try to assign to those who deal with software. So it's basic open source literacy, although I am trying to work with other folks to make it let's call it an industry-wide standard, rather than just our bespoke opinion. So what's basic open source literacy? Where are our policy stuff? Where's processes documented? Because again, those things are going to change, and they're going to change quickly. So having to redo your education portfolio, or God forsake your policy documents on a frequent basis, that's not going to work. You want to give people pointers. Don't send by value, but actually give people a place to go to find out what is the freshest, and then give people a voice. So from that social knowledge perspective, what things are working, what are opportunities, they become invested in the process getting better. So one, it reduces the load on your OSPO, but also they're invested in making the process meet their needs. And then your job is less my way or the highway, but really in just establishing those relationships and distilling those multiple opinions into one process that hopefully works the best for everybody. Cool. I'm going to get kicked out of the room in about a minute. If folks need to find me, I'm sure my email, Gab can probably send out my email, or Touch can send out my email. Track me down. I tend to go to a lot of events, especially Linux Foundation ones, because that's one of my responsibilities. Yeah, if you have any questions, if people have ideas, I'd love to try to figure out more common answers, because I don't think we're special, and special actually is pretty expensive. And I mean, honestly, the to-do group, I think, is a good forum to do that. It's just breaking into what I would say is more control-centric players, but it does provide a little bit of a neutral playing ground to put some of these ideas out there.
That's great. Thank you so much, Justin, for joining us and for the great presentation. And I'm sure we'll speak again soon.